In the summer of 1992, the savage killing of Rachel Nickell shocked the nation.
Push the little boy face down into the mud, and you stab Rachel 14 times. Can I comment?
Police are fallible, and in this case, they got the wrong man.
Rachel Nickell's killer remains at large. What went wrong?
While walking with her dog and 2-year-old son, Rachel Nickell was brutally attacked by a man armed with a knife. A vicious assault followed, with Rachel suffering almost 50 stab wounds, all while her son looked on, too young to even comprehend what was happening to his mother. Welcome back to Cold Case Diaries, where we shed light on mysterious cases from around the world. Today, we'll delve into the case of Rachel Nickell, which was solved after 16 years. But first, if you still haven't subscribed to our channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon below, as it motivates us to create more intriguing content for you. So, without further ado, let's dive right into this mystery. Wimbledon Common is a large grassy area that covers over 1,000 acres or 460 hectares. It is in Wimbledon, southwest London. The area cannot be sold or built on, as it has been reserved for the use of the general public. Today, there are weekly park runs on Wimbledon Common that see roughly 300 runners come out to complete a 5-kilometer track. Back in 1992, it was still a popular recreation zone, with many local families taking their children on walks through the area, while others walked their dogs or got some daily exercise in. It hardly seemed like this idyllic spot in busy London could be witness to a crime like the one that occurred on July 15th. Rachel Jane Nickell was born on November 23, 1968, to parents Monica and Andrew Nickell. She grew up in Great Totham, Essex, and was known by those around her as a kind and charitable young girl. Rachel loved to help others by volunteering with charities that aid disabled children and the elderly. When she was 11 years old, Rachel began attending Colchester High School for girls. It was at this age that she began singing and dancing at the Essex Dance Theatre. Rachel's teachers found that the arts came easily to her. She was a gifted actor, but Rachel preferred the academic side of things. After graduating high school, Rachel began studying towards an English and history degree. While attending university, Rachel made some money on the side by working as a lifeguard in a public pool in London. It was here that she met Andre Hanscom in 1988. It was easy to see why Andre fell in love with the beautiful, vivacious blonde. The pair hit it off right away, and a year later they welcomed a child, Alex. Once Alex was born, Rachel and Andre moved in together in Balham, South London. The arrival of Alex meant that Rachel couldn't focus all her time on getting her degree. Instead, she dropped out to raise her son. She still had ambitions, though. Rachel wanted to one day become a children's television presenter. After learning that, it is easy to imagine she was a magical mom to young Alex. On July 15, 1992, 23-year-old Rachel got Alex dressed for a walk on Wimbledon Common. She had no idea that less than 2 hours later, she would be dead. Rachel and Alex set off with their beloved Labrador Molly along a popular path. It was a beautiful summer's day, and there were many other children and their parents scattered around the area. As Rachel walked along, he was being followed. It was now around 10:20 a.m. The pair were seen laughing as they walked with Alex in his mother's arms. He would soon be turning 3, and many believed they were likely chatting about upcoming birthday plans. Then, without warning, a white male suddenly appeared. He was tall and slender with brown hair. He had a knife in his hand. Alex was pulled from his mother and dropped. Then, this man began attacking his mother. Rachel was stabbed 49 times. One of the stab wounds was so severe it nearly decapitated her. Once he was done stabbing her, the man began abusing her. While all of this occurred, Alex remained by his mother's side with no idea what was happening to her. The man then got up and fled, leaving Alex along with his mother. He began picking up the banknotes that had fallen from Rachel's pocket, trying to return them to her. One was even placed over Rachel's blood-stained face. It was as if Alex was trying to put a Band-Aid on her. After some time, a woman came across the horrific scene and notified the authorities, comforting Alex while the police made their way to the scene. He had been repeating the phrase, "Wake up, Mommy," when she found him. Soon, the area was flooded by officers. This was not the easiest crime scene due to the size of Wimbledon Common. There were potentially somewhere around 500 in this zone who may have seen something or even witnessed the crime itself. When news of this brazen assault hit the headlines, it shocked the entire country. The police were under pressure to get this case solved and the monster responsible off the street. Women living in South London at the time felt on edge. Rachel had been stalked and attacked in broad daylight. What would stop this man from doing the same again? During the investigation, 32 men were questioned in connection with Rachel's murder. One of those men was Colin Stagg. Colin was 31 years old and lived on Roehampton's Alton estate. He had lived there since childhood and recently found himself unemployed. This meant that Colin had a lot of free time on his hands. One of his daily activities was taking his dog for a walk on Wimbledon Common. Colin was frequently seen doing so. Criminal psychologist Paul Britton was asked by the Metropolitan Police to create a profile of their murderer. Paul believed the man responsible was in his 20s or 30s and likely someone who lived in the area. He had hobbies that he did alone and had an interest in knives and violent fantasies involving women. Paul added that the man would also be interested in the occult. A photo fit image was created using multiple witness accounts of who the authorities believed was the person who killed Rachel. When this photo fit was broadcast, 4 people called in to say that the person in the photo was Colin Francis Stagg. Colin was then paid a visit by detectives at his home, and before he knew it, he was down at the station being questioned. Colin hadn't ever been in trouble with the law before and found the whole ordeal surreal. When they searched Colin's home, detectives found a book on the occult. As this was part of Paul Britton's profile, it seemed from this point on that the police were well and truly honed in on Colin. He spent the next 3 days being questioned before the detectives were able to link Colin to a previous complaint a woman made about a man exposing himself to her. Colin knew exactly what incident they were talking about, but he maintained he had been nude sunbathing in a secluded spot away from view. Colin's solicitor told him to accept the claim and take the fine that went with it, as he was desperate to get home and out of the station. Colin did just that. As he now technically admitted to some sort of deviancy, he was further pushed to the top of the suspect list. When one of his former work colleagues contacted detectives to tell them, Colin had previously written a letter to her where he revealed a fantasy of making love out in the open air. For the detectives, this was enough to link him to Rachel's murder despite zero physical evidence doing so. They too knew that they would never be able to take charges any further without something more concrete. So, Operation Edsel was born with the goal of seeing whether Colin would implicate himself in the crime. The operation involved an undercover policewoman from the Metropolitan Police Special Operations Group. She contacted Colin, pretending to be a woman he used to speak to in a Lonely Hearts column. She spent the next 5 months trying to convince Colin that she had a romantic interest in him and talking to him about her fantasies. After getting Colin comfortable, the woman brought up Rachel's murder. While Colin played along with this woman's supposed fantasies, he never admitted to being involved in Rachel's murder. When Paul Britton, the criminal psychologist, heard this undercover officer was talking to Colin about fantasies, he strongly disagreed with this. In one audio clip between Colin and the officer, she brought up that she liked hurting people. Colin's response was, "Please explain, as I live a quiet life. If I have disappointed you, please don't dump me. Nothing like this has happened to me before." She went on to say if only you had done the Wimbledon Common murder, if only you had killed her, it would be all right. Colin's response was simple, "I'm terribly sorry, but I haven't." Despite his failing to ever admit to Rachel's killing, Colin was arrested and charged on the claims that he had described parts of the murder scene that he couldn't have known had he not been there. In September 1994, the case went to the Old Bailey. Mr. Justice Ognall was having none of it, saying the police showed deceptive conduct of the grossest kind. As there was no real evidence that tied him to Rachel's murder, the prosecution was forced to withdraw its case, and Colin Stagg was acquitted. The Metropolitan Police had now spent $3 million trying to prove the wrong man was guilty. The lead detective on the case, Keith Petter, maintained that they hadn't got it wrong. In 2001, he said the following in an EEB documentary: "Colin Stagg has been through a version of justice, albeit truncated, and he has been found not guilty. But I wonder whether he can say hand on heart that he believes people will meet him in the street and believe that. I do not believe that. System served anybody that particular day." His behavior during the investigation caused Keith to receive heavy public criticism. They wanted this murder solved, and it seemed the police had wasted months trying to prove the wrong man was guilty. When the truth was finally revealed, it became even more clear that the police had missed obvious clues that could have led them to their murderer. In the summer of 1989, 3 years before Rachel was murdered, a woman was attacked in her home in Plumstead, southeast London. She had been getting her children ready for school when a man accessed her home using the open back door. It was a truly nightmarish scene, as she dried her hair, with the noise of the blow-dryer masking out all other sounds. Something caught her attention out of the corner of her eye. When she turned to look at it, there was a man standing in her home. He had a knife in his hand and said he would hurt her children if she didn't listen to him. Over the next 4 years, similar attacks were carried out in the area. In August of that same year, a man called Robert Napper confessed to his mother, Pauline, about the attack on that woman in Plumstead. Pauline did the right thing and immediately called the police to tell them of the confession, but for whatever bizarre reason, they brushed the claim off, saying it didn't fit any cases on record. Pauline had long been concerned about her son's behavior. He suffered from Asperger's syndrome and spent much of his time alone. After hearing her son's confession, Pauline distanced herself from him. Robert Clive Napper was born on February 25, 1966, in London. He was the eldest child of Pauline and Brian Napper, who raised their children in Abbey Wood. Some reports suggest Brian was abusive towards Pauline, and Napper witnessed this behavior growing up. When he was 9 years old, his parents separated, and he and his 3 siblings were placed in foster care. Napper received psychological help from a young age. He was an awkward young boy who had no friends. Some reports also suggest that Napper was assaulted by a family member when he was 13 years old while on a camping holiday. He allegedly became even more reclusive after this, keeping himself to himself and becoming obsessively tidy. Around this time, Napper also began trying to spy on his sister when she was naked. Following the attack on the Plumstead woman, Napper spent much of his time walking along Green Chain Walk, a trail of pathways that stretched through southeast London. Many of these areas had perfect spots for Napper to hang back in the foliage, waiting for the right opportunity to present itself. There was one such incident just weeks before Rachel was murdered. A woman had been walking along the path with her child when Napper appeared and attacked her. She was shoved to the ground and strangled. He then assaulted her, all while her young child watched. Shockingly, despite the glaringly similar circumstances of this attack and Rachel's murder, the two crimes were not connected. And it wasn't only Colin Stagg who matched a photo fit. When the image of the Green Chain rapist was released, 2 separate callers identified the person in the image as Robert Napper. He was asked to come in and provide a blood sample at the police station after each phone call, but Napper never did. For some reason, no one pursued him. Had they done so, maybe Rachel would still be alive. In November 1993, 16 months after Rachel's murder, Samantha Bisset was murdered in her London flat. Samantha had been walking around her home naked, as she often did when she spotted a man peering through her window. Before Samantha could react, he was inside. Her 4-year-old daughter, Jasmine, was in the flat with her, and Samantha was likely terrified for her well-being. Just like Rachel, Samantha was viciously attacked with a knife and stabbed multiple times too. One of the wounds even severed her spinal cord. Samantha's boyfriend was the one who found her. She was lying on the floor, covered in blood. She had been stabbed so viciously that Samantha's organs were visible. Her autopsy revealed each individual organ had been stabbed, and the murderer tried to cut her leg off during the attack. Samantha's boyfriend then rushed to Jasmine's bedroom. To his horror, she too had been murdered. To put the scene into perspective for you, a crime scene photographer who worked on the case stopped working in the force after this. It was too much for him to bear. This murderer became known as the Plumstead Ripper. Unbelievably, Paul Britton had worked on the cases of the Plumstead Ripper, the Green Chain Rapist, and the murder of Rachel Nickell, all without connecting the crimes. It didn't help that the detectives working on Rachel's case were convinced Colin Stagg was their man, and that Napper, who was 6'2", was deemed to be too tall for the Green Chain suspect. When forensic investigators found Napper's fingerprints in the home of Samantha Bisset, he was placed under surveillance. They hadn't needed to get his fingerprint voluntarily, as Napper's prints were already on file from one of his 9 previous runs. Ins with the law. When his flat was eventually searched, detectives found detailed maps of London with several spots marked around Plumstead. They also found various degrading statements about women. Napper was soon arrested and interviewed. Despite denying the charges, Napper was taken to trial in late 1995, where he was convicted of the murders of Samantha and Jasmine. His luck had finally run out. Due to his mental issues, Napper was held at Broadmoor, an infamous psychiatric hospital also used to house inmates. One of only 3 in the UK, Broadmoor has had some of the UK's worst murderers behind its walls. That included Peter Sutcliffe. Better known as the Yorkshire Ripper, Sutcliffe was responsible for 13 murders. Ian Ball, the man who tried to kidnap Princess Anne on March 20, 1974, and David Copeland, the London nail bomber, who murdered 3 and injured many by setting off homemade nail bombs. In 1995, Robert Napper was questioned in relation to Rachel's death, but he denied any responsibility. The year 2000 came and went, and still, no one had been arrested for the murder of Rachel Nickell. In October 2002, the Scotland Yard got involved. They had a specialized cold case team review the entire investigation and utilized recent innovations in DNA recovery. This small but experienced team combed over witness statements and evidence found at the scene and re-examined all possible suspects. Critically, they also focused on seeing whether Rachel's death may have been connected to any other crimes. In 2003, information came out that tests of Rachel's clothing provided a male DNA sample that didn't belong to Alex or Rachel's boyfriend. Andre, while the same wasn't large enough to positively match a suspect, it did mean the team could now rule out people. They continued to chip away at the case. Before the team visited Robert Napper in July 2006, they spent 2 days at Broadmoor interviewing Napper, who was 40 years old at that time. He had been diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic on top of his Asperger syndrome. For over 10 years, Napper had been housed in the hospital. On November 28, 2007, Napper was charged with the assault and murder of Rachel Nickell. At his January hearing, Napper pleaded not guilty to the charges, and his trial began on November 11, 2008. In the end, Napper pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of Rachel on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Robert Napper will remain at Broadmoor indefinitely. Mr. Justice Griffith Williams called Napper a very dangerous man. Everyone was certain that if Napper was ever released, he would go on to kill again. The sharp increase in violence of his crimes showed clear escalation, and Napper was likely feeling invincible as the police failed to link him to Rachel's murder, enabling him to do the same to Samantha. When Robert Napper was convicted, Colin Stagg was well and truly vindicated. The Metropolitan Police issued a public apology for Colin's prosecution. Despite their clear failures in the investigation, no one on the Rachel Nickell investigation was ever disciplined or fired. Charges of professional misconduct were laid against Paul Britton in October 2002, but these were eventually dismissed. Alex Hanscom, Rachel's son, suffered for years with the mental strain of witnessing what he had put on him. Every night, Alex would go through a flood of nightmares, waking up after reliving his mother's murder again. Police and psychologists tried to speak to Alex, but he was unable to get any words out. Even Andre couldn't get his son to talk about what happened. With the media storm that surrounded Rachel's murder, Andre thought it best to take his son somewhere quiet. He settled in France for a few months before moving to a small Spanish village. Andre hired a female tutor for Alex, but she was no replacement for what he had lost. With time, love, and care, Alex began to heal. He was given a small amount from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board for the loss of his mother. As for Colin, he spent the next 14 years as a social outcast. The law may have cleared him of any involvement, but the public jury had decided he was guilty. This was due to the heavily publicized claims made against him. In August 2008, after Robert Napper was charged, Colin Stagg was given a record compensation payment of £700,000. One of the first things he spent money on was a £5,000 donation to the Wounded Veterans Charity. As for Alex, he still lives in Spain, where he settled all those years ago with his father and works as a yoga instructor. He spoke to The Sun in 2018, saying, "I looked down at my mother lying on the ground. She looked so peaceful, as if asleep and ready to wake up at any moment. I shouted, 'Get up, Mummy,' with all my strength. In less than a second, life seemed to come to a standstill. She was gone. My heart was completely broken." Alex continued, "There was beautiful sunshine, and I remember the sound of people having picnics in the grass and our dog Molly circling around us. We saw a stranger who was lurching towards us, and he had a black bag over his shoulder. Then I was grabbed and thrown to the ground, my face dragged across the mud. A few seconds later, my mother collapsed beside me." The investigation into the murder of Rachel serves as a stark reminder of how officers should handle murder cases. While it is always easier to say these things in hindsight, had Rachel's investigation been handled correctly and Napper been caught, Samantha and Jasmine may still be here today. What did you think of today's case? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled for the next mystery to unfold.